good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Kerry Ransom. I'm Managing Director of BankTech Ventures, and I have a great privilege today to welcome and thank our new friend, Robert Johnston from Adlumin, who is the founder and CEO and is going to present to all of you on this topic of bank security in 2022. And before I introduce and give a little bit of background on Robert, wanted to say first, thanks to all of you for joining. This is a big part of the culture of BankTech Ventures and what we're trying to do for this ecosystem. And a big part of this involves bringing luminaries like Robert both into this community and into our fund as people that we want to back, who have a great commitment to improving the effectiveness and efficiency and competitiveness of community banks like yours. And so we look for people that have that drive, have that heart and intentionality, and then also have world-class points of view and world-class capabilities. Robert has all of those. And so I can think of no one better to really be the first investment that we got to make in BankTech Ventures and to be the first in our ongoing series of luminaries that we want to bring to you. And I think you'll find, and Robert, I didn't even have to talk to him about this, that he's a naturally a giver and an educator. And this is not going to be a sales pitch for Adlumin. I'll be surprised if, all of you on here are not raising your hand and saying, when can we get a demo? When can we talk about bringing Adlumin into our bank, if you haven't already, because of just how compelling he is. But he has been a true contributor and giver to this community bank market for several years. And I think we were super excited by the opportunity to continue the relationship that he has with many of us within BankTech Ventures and with many of you in community banking by having the opportunity to invest, and then also be able to welcome him to this webinar today. So we welcome feedback at all times. So feel free, anything that we can do better in future ones. We certainly want that feedback. Feel free to reach out to Sarah or me at any time with thoughts, feedback, suggestions. We welcome it. And with that, thanks again for coming, and we'll get started. So as a quick intro, again, Robert Johnston is the founder and CEO of Adlumin. They are really leading the way in financial institution security and focused on security and compliance automation for banks. So not only is it about making you more secure, it's also about making you more efficient in the process of being more secure. He is a world-renowned expert and leader in cybersecurity, a lot of counterterrorism, espionage. He's been doing this for a long time. And so it was very natural for him to find a problem in this industry that he could solve better than anything else out there and start a company. And so he did that several years ago. He's been growing very quickly. He already has well over 100 ICBA member community banks as customers today. And as I said, I think you all be very excited to make him a partner with your bank if you are not already. So with that, I want to say thank you, Robert, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts on how we can all be more secure in 2022. So thanks for joining, and take it away.
Thanks so much for the kind introduction, Kerry. Really appreciate that. It makes me incredibly proud. I feel like to be BankTech Ventures' first investment. We have a long history in serving the community bank industry. We were ICBA Think Tech Accelerator graduates back in 2019. I still remain very close with the gentlemen and ladies at ICBA, and of course the Venture Center out in Little Rock, Arkansas. At Adlumin, we're also preferred service providers of the ICBA, and now, actually, to be announced in a couple of days, preferred service providers of the Community Bankers Association of Illinois, CBAI. So very excited about some of the partnerships that we'll have out there. In short, right, Adlumin is a command center for security operations in the community banking sector. But today we're really going to discuss 2021. 2021 from a security and attack perspective was an exciting year. Exciting is kind of a positive word in many cases, but there was a lot going on, a lot of firsts, a lot of new rises to the top of the food chain as far as threats go. And we're fortunate here at Adlumin to have so many banks as customers, as well as other financial institutions and other institutions across the United States in different sectors, that we actually got a really good look at the needs and desires of a lot of organizations when it came to some of these high profile attacks. And we also really got an opportunity to see where most of the gaps were, like what could have been done better in order to better position a bank for success when these things came to the surface. So we're going to spend a lot of time dissecting about 4 different high profile vulnerabilities and attacks that occurred in 2021, and talk about some ways that we could have seen some improvement. So breaches in finance are no short order. I think the original concept has always been, banks have all the money, right? And so, of course, people want to steal it. It's like the oldest crime in history, right? But in today's landscape, it's there's a lot more going on than just trying to steal money, right? I think the most prevalent that's on everyone's mind is ransomware, right? These are really extortion type attacks, but they're just debilitating. And from my experience over 2021, even if a financial institution like a bank wasn't affected by a particular attack, or maybe they had a service provider that was affected by a particular attack, there is this ripple effect of damages that occurs, even if you did everything right. If you have a phone service provider and a server on your bank network from an MSP that provides you phone services, and that system gets hit with ransomware, like, the regulatory requirements that you face are going to, implement really a series of damages. So we've seen kind of threats almost change shape when you're taking a look at financial institutions. It used to be, well, I want to make sure no one steals money, right? Which is still a problem today, but I think it's actually a lesser problem than some of the more extortion-based threats that you face today, or just the fact that some incident, even such a small incident, may mean that you have to take a whole slew of steps that will cause you damages, as far as hiring consulting firms or getting insurance companies and lawyers involved, just to sort it out from a regulatory perspective. So, I think as I look at 2022, based on what I saw in 2021, you're definitely going to see a heavy increase in these extortion type attacks, which, regardless of whether you talk about paying the ransom or not, are going to cause you secondary and tertiary damages when it comes to, actions that you must take from a regulatory perspective because of some certain incident. So what are the problems that we've seen community bankers face? I really drop them in kind of 4 different buckets, I would call it. The first is increasing regulatory and compliance. So, cybersecurity is on everyone's radar, especially with the rise in ransomware attacks. So, the regulators, their solution to this problem is increase regulation, right? Increase things that you must do in order to ensure that on a level playing field, all banks are trying to solve the problem or put in the appropriate level of defenses at some minimum level. Unfortunately, the same regulations that are driving, say, Bank of America, who has incredible resources, is headquartered in New York City, where the talent pool is very easy to come by as far as cybersecurity talent, for which there is currently a massive shortage. it's a much different problem if you're a Bank of America than it is if you're a community bank in maybe rural America or a small city. The talent pool that you have access to solve these problems, and just the resources that you can apply to the problems are vastly different. Which brings me to decreasing capacity, right? So, compliance and regulatory and compliance requirements are on the rise, but yet the IT teams are not increasing in size, right? So in the community banking sector, we've generally seen the size of the IT or the security team, which they are really, one and the same at most community banks. The number of people or capacity that you have in that department is not increasing, but everything else around you is increasing. All those external pressures, being increased regulatory and compliance requirements, as well as an increasing threats, are rising around you. So this, paves way for technology like Adlumin or like many other, companies in the United States to be able to really help, solve some of these forces that are creating obstacles to security and compliance. So today we're going to talk about a couple of different points of focus, and we're just going to use vignettes to really discuss these points of focus. But in the back of your mind, I want you to just kind of put them in, I would call it, 3 technology buckets, right? You have proactive, so things you can do in advance of a threat occurring in order to better defend yourself, right? Most of these come in the form of configurations. There, many times when we drop into a bank, we find, open shares that are vulnerable to ransomware, or open systems, or configurations because of different software, maybe teller software that you have inside of your environment. If these configurations remain in place, even the best technology defenses can't help you, right? This is really a problem that must be taken care of before any incident occurs in order to make sure you are in the best position, because in reality, some of these misconfigurations, or maybe your network is configured like this by default, leaves a network share open to ransomware because of certain permissions and privileges that you gave to a group that's really broad, right? Well, you have assigned that group those permissions, so there's no technology defense that can help you because you have explicitly allowed some certain action to take place. So focusing on things from a proactive measure. You've got detection and mitigation. Of course, that is your blocking and tackling of cybersecurity, finding something bad, putting an end to it. And then there are certain attacks that they're going to happen more and more, I think, as we look forward, and being able to have the ability to look back in time to such an extent that you can detect if there was an incident 10 months ago, which in some cases became a reality. Of course, in certain breaches, you needed that kind of historical reach back capability that allowed you to look back so far back in advance. And we saw many people who weren't using our product or weren't using, Snapshot 365, which is our log retention product. They weren't able to look back, to the horizon that, 1, was required by auditors, but 2, required to prevent or analyze breach telemetry to make sure that their institution was not affected, or even worse, if it was affected. So today we're going to start with the Colonial pipeline breach. A very high-profile breach, not a financial institution, but it's a ransomware group, none the same. This really took advantage, I think, of a few things going on globally across the world. The first was the migration to remote work. At Adlumin here, we have a heavy focus on what I call points of access. And there are a couple of points of access that generally, broadly speaking, are the same across any bank and organization. Your cloud email, if you're using something like Google or Office 365, your VPN, which was heavily used during the remote work phase, which a lot is still going on today, and of course, directly the bank network. External points of access are what really these ransomware groups are using to gain access and implement the attack. Ransomware, when it's just delivered by a phishing email and like a teller clicks on it, it's actually the amount of effect that will have is pretty small. Like, I mean, ransomware may run, but the scope of damage that you'll experience is actually not that high. Where things get really dangerous is when these ransomware groups gain complete access to the network, right? They literally log into the VPN. I mean, that's almost 100% of the ransomware attacks that we've thwarted have always been at the point of access to the VPN, right? So we've caught some ransomware group logging in from Eastern Ukraine onto your VPN because of a phishing email where they compromised cloud email, or they got the username and password from someone who gave it up in a kind of a fake form, or a fake login form for O365, or a fake login form for your VPN. Now, the Colonial pipeline breach actually started with darknet exposure. At Adlumin, we have an application. It's included in our product called Darknet Exposure. That's the name of it. And what we're doing is looking for leaked credentials that exist across the open, deep, and dark web in order to make sure that the accounts for which those credentials belong to, the passwords have been rotated. So even if there is a password that is valid on the open, deep, and dark web for a specific employee account that could access the VPN or something like that, that password is changed and an attacker can no longer use it. This, at the Colonial pipeline breach, this was the initial point of entry. A couple of things happened here. One, they thought this employee account was removed from the network. They actually didn't even think that account still existed. It was an employee at one time. That employee was since terminated, but his account was not terminated. And so he would be a compliance violation at a bank, something called a stale account, a feature that we track to make sure that you have no stale accounts, or at least every stale account is accounted for and cataloged. This initial point of entry proved to actually be the knife in the back for Colonial Pipeline. There was a username and password that was on the open, deep, and dark web for that account. That password was valid because that employee hadn't been around in a really long time, so it was still the same password. That password could be used on the VPN, and so the attackers were able to log into the VPN as if they were just that old or ex-employee's, ex-employee, and then distribute that debilitating attack from there. That's really where things get really bad, is when they're able to gain access to the network, because then they can broadly propagate ransomware across many endpoints that cause the most damage. So when it comes to chronological steps throughout the attack, of course, in Colonial Pipeline, you had the breach, right? The next thing that fell after that was cloud email. A lot of people are using their email for two-factor authentication. It is an extra step, using your email for two-factor authentication. There's always these arguments on what versions of two-factor to use. You can use SMS text messaging. You can use software two-factor, something like Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator. That's probably being the strongest. Really being the strongest is a no-kidding hardware token that you would get from like RSA, where they give you a little device, but that's not the most scalable. But cloud email is typically the first to fall. Where we catch a lot of breaches from ransomware groups is these Office 365 phishing emails. You need to change your password, only it's not real, but it looks real. They've gotten really good at kind of duplicating what a legitimate, Microsoft password reset form looks like. And so they're sending these phishing emails saying, hey, this is Office 365, you need to reset your password. And it's very, very easy for your tellers or for any employee to fall for that. I would say we almost catch a breach a week, realistically, here at Adlumin, a breach a week across cloud email across our customers. It's just prevalent. But the problem that imposes is many of you are using SAML authentication so that your Office 365 password might be the same as your VPN password, or you're sharing Active Directory. And so those passwords are the same. So then the next logical step is, of course, a breach of the VPN, which happened at Colonial Pipeline. That breach of the VPN then leads to access to the network, which eventually propagates and ends with malware or ransomware being deployed throughout the environment. So in the Colonial pipeline breach, focus on two proactive points of entry. One is darknet exposure, right? Just that's a layup, you would call it, right? Just being able to find usernames and passwords that were exposed, and just making sure those passwords are rotated. Frankly, just stopping it right there is such an easy thing to do. Just making sure that that password does not precede the date of the breach. And right then and there, the Colonial pipeline breach could have been stopped. We're recognizing that this is a stale account and that stale account needs to be disabled. You just do that basic kind of layup, blocking and tackling, and this breach never happened, and everyone would have gotten their gas on the East Coast on time, no problems, nothing to be worried about, right? So monitoring those external access points and darknet exposure have become a much more recently important in thwarting these devastating type attacks. Next up, this Kaseya Breach. This is one we actually had some clients experience, I would call it tertiary effects. Many of you on this call may have even experienced some of these tertiary effects. No bank, at least in our portfolio, was hit directly with this. Now, what did happen is there were some managed service providers, and I always use the phone providers because they were providing phone services. There were some managed service providers, some MSPs throughout America that were providing phone services to a couple of banks. And to provide these phone services, there was a server, I assume having some kind of phone operator technology on it. The problem with these servers were that the bank itself had no introspection into these servers. They lived outside of really the security ecosystem that was at the bank. The MSP owned these servers. They were the only ones allowed to log into these servers to manage, the phone software that was running the phone systems. The bank wasn't allowed to install software on these particular phone servers, so they were really isolated and just owned by the MSP. Well, it just so happens that in order to manage these servers remotely, the phone server MSP used Kaseya to manage them remotely, so that their engineers could, if you were having an issue with your phone system, could use Kaseya to log into that system or push an update or install more software, whatever they needed on that particular server. Well, the problem came into place with mapped shares. So in order to run this phone server, there had to be a few persistently mapped shares throughout the environment. So the phone server sitting on the network, of course, maps different share drives to access certain files and pictures and things like that. Something even routine is just making sure that your VoIP phones had the bank logo on the little screen on each of those VoIP phones. So it mapped these share drives to bank-owned systems. Now, one of the propagation tools of ransomware is to run on a system and, of course, completely encrypt and damage the system that it runs on. But before it does that, it maps every share drive that it can and attempts to encrypt the contents of all of those share drives. And then it, of course, turns to encrypting the system that it's actually running on. So this is where some of the banks experienced some effects from ransomware. So malware never even ran on a bank-owned system, but despite this fact, they still felt the effects of this. And this has to do with something in our platform we call at-risk shares. And we see this all the time at community financial institutions, because the default is just open up privileges so that every domain user can access every share drive that I have on my network at the most privileged level. Because, hey, that's the easiest, right? That makes sure that data can be shared, that no one ever has any problems accessing anything, even though that may be like an important share, like the finance share, the HR share, the loan origination, or whatever it is. These at-risk shares, when you configure them that way, this is exactly what ransomware is taking advantage of, is the fact that you have overprivileged your share drives to such a broad number of people that it can read, write, and execute on those shares, so it can encrypt all the files on those particular share drives. Now, even though in this particular case that malware didn't run on those systems, and they didn't run on any bank-owned systems, the ripple effect that occurred at these financial institutions, I feel like, was tremendous, because as soon as that happened, regulators had to be called. People had to be notified. A consulting company had to be hired. Even though you can say from the Adlumin system, no malware ever even ran on here, it was that MSP server over there that no one has any introspection into, that connected to persistent map shares and encrypted some of the data on those particular shares. So, it is that fact that drives what is going on, from a ransomware perspective on these particular shares. Now, at Adlumin, we've done a couple of things here. One, we have a variety of ransomware detections. We have a new feature coming out called Total Ransomware Defense, which is a small kernel driver that will be loaded that extracts keys from memory, that stops ransomware execution, and it will actually stop the connection from these share drives if it sees data being encrypted remotely from a share connection. And so that is kind of a last mile thing. Kaseya is one of those complicated breaches that, you don't control Kaseya. You have zero effect over Kaseya. You can't force Kaseya to do anything, let alone your MSP, or probably didn't even know that Kaseya was installed on those systems. So this is a really, hard breach to stop, but it's one that the proactive component needed to be put in place so that people didn't experience such debilitating effects from these map drives. So let's talk the Solarwinds Breach. The Solarwinds Breach is next up. So this is one of those breaches that occurred, months and months and months in advance, right? So we had, a very highly sophisticated, nation state attacker, run a series of compromises at a company called Solarwinds. Solarwinds runs popular IT software, right? Runs very popular IT software that a lot of organizations just use across the globe. This is categorized as a supply chain compromise, in that the actual software updating mechanism that SolarWinds uses to update all of its software was itself Trojanized. What we noticed was, and this is common with IT people. Look, I come from a security background, even at one point, even an IT background. And if you want to find the biggest cheaters of security systems, oftentimes you need to just look at the IT people, because they have the ability to circumvent everything if they want to circumvent everything, and they're trying to get so much done so quickly. Oftentimes they're the people responsible for sidelining things that they're really supposed to be doing. We did find that a lot with the SolarWinds servers, and this has to do with lifecycle management that you are responsible for on your network. Right? The server exists on your network. You're responsible for updating it, making sure security software is installed, making sure all of those things exist on that system, so that the SolarWinds box or the SolarWinds computer does not sideline or circumvent the typical security requirements that you would see on a normal computer system. So that's the first thing we recognized. They were not treated like normal computer systems. They were special. They didn't have any security software installed with them. The last thing that, and this goes into that log management, this is going to happen more and more, especially when it comes to nation state type attacks, where the duration for which, the horizon for which you need to be able to search for indicators of compromise was about 10 months. And the reason for that is this, this breach went unnoticed for at least 10 months before someone found out about it. So then the question is not, is this ongoing right now, right? That's not the question that was being asked. The question that was being asked was I compromised at any point for the last 10 months? And a lot of financial institutions were really unable to answer that question, mostly because a lot of the indicators came from the firewall. The firewall is a very voluminous data point, like it can produce hundreds of gigabytes in a month. Now, times that by 10 months, you need an extraordinary storage volume in order to be able to search back that far, as well as just a system that can search across and parse through 10 months worth of firewall data at a couple hundred gigabytes per month. This is an extraordinary amount of volume. Of course, it's a big data system problem. In the cloud at Adlumin, it's a data lake solution, right? So we've got the ability to store things in data lakes, run searches for long periods of time. So people were able to easily answer the question, hey, in the past 10 months, have I been able to look back to the appropriate search horizon in order to be able to find out if I've ever been affected by the threat actor in the Solarwinds breach. Last up, probably most near and dear to your current heart is the Log4j vulnerability. This is something that we're still somewhat dealing with in our financial institutions today, even although to a lesser extent today than it was, say, even a few weeks ago. So Log4j was a remote code execution vulnerability in commonly used open source code, a code library that's run on tons of applications across the world, across the globe. At banks, we noticed really just two areas of vulnerability. For those that still had on-premise Exchange, or were still running some form of on-premise email, in your IIS applications, which is what's running your OWA, your remote access email, so that bank employees can get their email on their phone, not through O365, but connecting directly to a bank email system or logging into OWA remotely. There were a few cases where the applications that were running behind IIS that were externally facing were running vulnerable versions of Log4j, and then Linux systems. Now at Adlumin, we have great Linux capabilities, but in other banks, Linux log collection capabilities, and in other banks, they don't have great introspection into their Linux systems, which dominate any web server market. So a lot of folks have web server or FTP servers or a variety of different servers that they didn't even know was really exposed to the internet. Linux was using a lot of Log4j, a lot of that library in the underlying applications that existed on this system. And so we were detecting a lot of real-time exploitation of Log4j, mostly on Linux systems. IIS was a little more challenging. This was one of those types of vulnerabilities that doesn't pop up very much. This is the first time I've really heard of one at this particular scale, which was a massive scale. Hopefully they don't pop up more in the future, where such a commonly used application was exploitable with such an easy to implement exploitation method. It's not so much the fact that it was so broad, but that just exploitation was so simple. It was so simple, which is not the case in every method of exploitation, but in this particular case it was. One of the challenging things about Log4j is there were many iterations of this vulnerability. It was like, oh, this vulnerability popped up, and then we released this patch. Well, a week after the patch was released, it's like, well, actually, if you just run your exploitation method just a little bit differently, right, it bypasses the patch. And then, the other patch had a vulnerability. So there was a ton of iterations, and where we saw a challenge was, banks were really struggled with running the vulnerability scans, right, keeping up with the patch iterations. They struggled with kind of blocking and tackling vulnerability scanning, blocking and tackling patch management, which Adlumin does provide, and continuous vulnerability management. But you had to update your scanner, and there was just a lot of work involved in making sure that you could keep up with the various iterations of this vulnerability as it kind of morphed and changed over several weeks. Now, good news is in today, this has largely been handled and taken care of, and we're still seeing some issues with Log4j, but mitigated for the most part, been mitigated. So what are the things that you need to focus on to stop these types of attacks from occurring, or what we experienced in 2021? You've got that proactive piece. You've got to make sure your configurations are right. You got to make sure your configurations are right so that someone else's problem, being that MSP providing you phone services, doesn't become your problem because you have so many at-risk shares that data and encryption can happen from ransomware. Having the right defenses in place, being something like total ransomware defense, which we have, ransomware type detections, proactive at-risk programs, in order to make sure that you're taking care of things in advance, so that if an incident does occur, which is outside of your control, like Kaseya, that you've got both the proactive mitigations in place, as well as the real-time detection and mitigation that you may need in order to put an end to whatever is going on immediately. Then you've got detection and mitigation, of course, using user behavior analytics, log aggregation analytics, and then solving the talent problem with a SOC, right? With an MDR service, a managed detection and response service, being able to answer those compliance questions as well as those security questions, making sure that you're safe and secure on a 24/7 basis. And then finally, having something like the Solarwinds Breach being an educational tool, being able to store large amounts of data for a long search horizon so that you can answer not only the question, is something going on right now, but has something occurred in the past 10 months that I need to be concerned with. So these are important factors to rope into your technology. Frankly, not all of these things can be done on premise on a single system. In reality, these types of attacks that have occurred in 2021 are a huge play for cloud native services, because it takes, in order to solve them, a tremendous amount of computing power, for which you do not want to do the lifecycle management on the amount of computing power that's really required to solve these problems. So at Adlumin, we've got a variety of different products that we deliver to the banking space. Of course, total ransomware defense, putting an end to ransomware, core banking security, darknet exposure. We have that Overwatch product, which is an MDR feature set, so that we've got a series of security analysts that are always just watching and ensuring that your bank is safe and secure, integrating in all of your security technology, deploying our own, where we become kind of a space where both bank employees, maybe your partner, and Adlumin can all operate in a single ecosystem together, automating security and compliance. All right, so that's all I have for you today. I'll open the floor up to any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Robert. Again, if you guys want to ask a question, at the bottom, if you hover over the lower section of your screen, there is a spot to input questions there. Otherwise, if you just raise your hand, I can unmute you and you can ask Robert directly. While we wait for some questions to come in, I have a few already for you. Firstly, it seems like 2021, obviously it was quite the year. Where do you recommend that banks get started with consolidating their security operations?
Great question. Yeah, banks, they've got all these different point technologies that we've seen, your antivirus or firewall, your cloud email, different security systems, maybe even on your cloud email. They struggle from a capacity perspective to monitor it all. And they struggle from a capacity perspective to integrate it all, correlate it all together, and fundamentally just put it in one place, right? It's still a challenge today. You've really got to bring all that in and put people on it that know what they're doing in order to put your best foot forward. So I would start with data consolidation, right? At this point, every bank's got a firewall. Every bank's got antivirus. Every bank's got an email system of some kind, hopefully email security of some kind. Really begin by focusing on, data and process consolidation when it comes to your security data and your compliance data, That way your audits will just be easier, right? Your audits will be way easier. It won't be such a huge overhead. It won't be such a struggle. And then, of course, just security in general will be a lot simpler as well.
That's perfect. Thank you. And then next question is, how long would it take to integrate a system like Adlumin into a bank's existing environment?
This varies across kind of the different systems that are in the marketplace. Some systems could take up to several months to properly integrate and get properly configured, which is a huge obstacle. And it takes an incredible amount of manpower to get these systems up and running. I would say one of the nice differentiators I think at Adlumin is how easy we make our system to integrate. So it takes about 90 minutes to get Adlumin up and running, everything from your cloud email to your AV to everything else. And the main reason for that is we operate in so many banks that we know exactly what we're consuming, right? And we've built purpose-built telemetry collection software to just work out of the box with zero configuration, which means, someone that doesn't have a lot of time can implement a system like this very easily with high automation, kind of low customization, which in the community banking market has been, a huge advantage. But you're right, there are a lot of obstacles or barriers to entry when it comes to software integration. I think we've come a long way in eliminating a lot of those barriers.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, definitely helpful for, community banks who don't have unlimited time and resources to integrate. So I feel like you guys have already done most of the legwork and make it for an easy integration, which is a big perk. Brent also asked, how successful has ransomware been in the US-based financial institutions? We see other industries, MFG, energy, health, et cetera, being victimized, but much less in FIs.
Broadly, that's correct. Kaseya obviously affected many financial institutions, either directly or kind of through a provider that they were using to provide some kind of ancillary service. Broadly, you are correct. Healthcare has just been hit a lot by ransomware. I feel like that is certainly surfacing a lot in the news. The regulatory standards by which you must secure a bank are a lot stronger in finance. It is arguably the most regulated industry in the United States, where cybersecurity regulation is a significant portion of that. So I feel like just if you're looking kind of on average, the security defenses at a financial institution are probably better than the security defenses at like a small hospital, which probably has a lot to do with the success rate that Brent is talking about.
Okay, and then another quick question is, how can banks get a hold of you and the Adlumin team, and what would next steps be for them? Who do you recommend, communicating with you? What team members do you like to get involved in? Can you kind of walk us through case study of typical integration process with one of your community banks?
Yep, sure. So you can always reach out, either directly with the email that's on the screen here, or go to our website adlumin.com and book a demo, or even they could reach out probably through the BankTech Ventures team, and you can get them in contact with us as well. The next step is typically a demo. If you do need a product like ours and you are interested in automating a lot of your security and compliance automation tasks, have your team get on with us. It'll take 30, 45 minutes, a demo. We offer a proof of value that's free for everybody. You get to just try it. 2 weeks on your network. We get to solve a lot of problems, actually, especially on the proactive side during that 2-week period of time. And we can fix a bunch of things that you probably really won't like even existed. And so that's usually a very good experience for financial institutions as well. We have a variety of LPs already as customers. If they want to share their names, they're certainly free to do so. And you can talk about that experience with them as well and see how that went. And so that's what I would recommend, reaching out the email below or reaching out through BankTech or through our website by booking a demo, and we'll get you on a quick demo. And if you're interested and in the right kind of position, well, we can do a free trial.
That'd be great. Yeah. And I know, we have some existing limited partners who are already your customers, and I'm sure, we'd be happy to connect prospective customers with them to talk about their experiences as well with Adlumin, as I know they've all been very positive.
Thank you so much.
Does anybody else have any questions for Robert? I haven't seen any other questions come in. Oh, okay. We have one from Neil asking, is Adlumin an endpoint licensing model or a user licensing model?
We have a user licensing model, as well as, I wouldn't call it an endpoint licensing model, because we have a per device licensing model. So like not everything we do is endpoints. Like we integrate in your Office 365 or your antivirus, your EDR product, your anti-phishing product, stuff like that. So it's really done on per user or per device. And a device could be a router or a switch. It can also be an endpoint. So a firm fixed price per device. So you know exactly what your costs are. It's not like your energy bill where it's fluctuating or anything like that. It's a fixed price.
Perfect. Thank you.
Robert, I have a quick question. So you mentioned the proof of value, which is a great way to give people a super low risk way to initially engage. What do you advise is the best way to sort of do, if I'm asking myself, where am I most at risk, or how close to best practice am I? What's the best way to sort of get a good baseline audit of my current overall cybersecurity footprint within my bank?
We do have a score. We call it our Network Health Index score, which is a combination of about 15 different factors throughout your network, for which the at-risk program, what I talked about, making sure those privileges and permissions are as locked down as possible, are a component, right? One component. So that's a good place to start. When we usually integrate with a bank, we integrate the product, we see what that Network Health Index score is, and then we say, the bank's natural next question is like, sometimes, oh my God, where do I begin, right? And our response is, well, we just begin with what is bringing down your Network Health Index score. And so we start working on those task items in order to bring that Network Health Score Index up, which in turn is, of course, just increasing the resiliency of the bank, really focused nowadays on ransomware, especially at Adlumin, increasing that ransomware resiliency inside the environment.
Thank you.
Last call for questions, if you just want to type them into the chat. And otherwise, I will be sending out a follow-up email, both with a recording of Robert's presentation and then also his and his team's contact information in case you'd like to get in touch with them and discuss cybersecurity, next steps for your bank further, or even do a quick deep dive analysis into, what would be the most realistic next steps throughout 2022. And again, I really want to extend a huge thank you to Robert, spending an hour educating all of us, his team as well, for getting this set up. And, thank you to all of you for spending an hour. I know yesterday was a holiday, so we're all catching up on emails over the weekend and last week. Carrie, any last words as well before we wrap up?
I want to echo thank you to everyone. And as we said at the beginning, please feel free to send us thoughts, suggestions, feedback, and anything. We want to continue to serve you in the best possible way. And I know, that's a big reason why we are working with Robert as one of our key investments, because he is of similar mind and heart to really protecting in all possible ways the community bank industry. So thanks, Robert, for joining us, and thanks to all of you, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Bye, everybody.